What is happening, guys? This is Drake Allen back for another episode of Cold Beer and Whitetails. I think we're on episode 3 now. Just want to thank everybody who's subscribed, liked videos. Guys, our channel's growing rapidly. Only been doing this 2-3 weeks now, and we're growing at a pretty good rate. And like I said, thanks for anybody following. If you haven't followed yet, hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on. We'll come at you once a week with an episode. Cold Beer and Whitetails every Monday. And we'll also be publishing shorts based on archery content, boys. Well, again, drinking another Diet Coors. Cheers to everybody out there. Crack a cold one, boys. I had to drink 2 swigs because it's damn good. It's going down like water. As you can tell by the title of the video, this is obviously about my shot process. You can implement a lot of, if you will, what I'm going to give you and tailor it towards your thoughts and your patterns and what you're doing. But more importantly, I just want you to be more informative on what you're doing when you're slinging arrows instead of doing just that, flinging them downrange. I'm going to talk about blueprinting a controlled shot process. A lot of people shoot arrows, whether it be at their house or at a range, and don't really realize what they were thinking when they make a good shot, what they were saying to themselves, and more importantly, speech patterns turn into behaviors. And that's kind of how we do things, whether you know that consciously or not. In the military, a sniper has a shot protocol, right? And why this is very important is because, if you're just shooting at your house or downrange and you make a good shot, a lot of times, a lot of people don't really know what went into that good shot. And again, why this is important to touch base back on that is when you're going to take an animal's life, a lot of those thoughts kind of go out the window based on adrenaline rushes, conditions, how fast the moment can happen. And so really being able to control that moment and make that moment go slower than what's going on in your head, because a lot of times things can play out so fast that before you know it, the moment's over and you've made a bad decision, followed it up with a bad shot, and now you're kicking yourself in the rear end. And so what I want to discuss with you guys is my shot process. One last thing before I get into my personal shot process. I know I kind of mentioned the military earlier. That's just kind of what clicked to me when I heard it. I've heard 2 people I want to give credit to. I mean, I didn't just come up with this process by myself. If you want to look up a guy named Joel Turner, and it has his own channel called Shot IQ, which is the art of having a controlled shot process. And oddly enough, Jocko Willink, he's gotten into bow hunting throughout a couple different guys, through Joel Turner or Joe Rogan or the Knock On guy, Knock On Archery. What he has talked about is having a shot protocol and process. Like a sniper is so involved in his process that he can feel the sears in his trigger. And what I want to talk to you about is being in a closed loop process. Is what I mean by that is being able to stop your shot at any time. And a lot of people think whenever somebody draws back and they're getting ready to shoot and they let down, oh, that's a bad thing. What a rookie. He couldn't get his shot off. He couldn't let down. That means you were so involved on your process that whether it be one of your steps that you go through was not happening for you in a manner that you didn't feel confident enough to let that shot go. So that is actually a sign of a really good controlled shot process. From my standpoint and personal experience, I didn't really have a whole lot of a shot process until about 2 years ago. And I've been hunting whitetail for 6 years, bow hunting. So my first 3.5 years, almost 4 years really, I just got in the moment, and what happened, and I had to live with it. Whether it was a bad shot and I never found the deer, or in a lot of ways I got lucky and made a good shot. It's not like my head was in the game throughout the whole shot process. And I can honestly say that has happened to me for about 3 or 4 deer of recent, where I through the whole way through knew exactly what was going on. So I'm going to dive into my 4-step shot process My first one I think about as I'm drawing my bow back is grip. I think about my grip in two ways. While I'm holding it on the front end of my bow, I want my bow to be on my meaty part of my hand, not in the middle of my hand. And why I don't want it in the middle of my hand is that creates torque in your shot, allowing your pin to go back and forth a whole lot easier at your release. The second way that most people don't talk about, most people really emphasize gripping your bow, having your bow here on the meaty part of your hand as you're going through your drawing process, which is extremely important based on what I just told you, so you can not create that torque. But secondly, I have a two-step check off while I'm thinking. I think grip, and my front hand is gripping where it needs to be, like I just discussed. And the second part is the grip on my release is in a good manner. So whether you shoot a hand release, or whether you shoot a wrist release, or you shoot a hand release where you've got a button, I shoot a hand release that's got a button on it. So I like to keep my grip here within the knuckles, the confinements of my knuckles. And you don't want to over grip and you don't want to under grip where it's barely on the tip of your fingers. So focusing on that portion of it, and if you have a wrist release, I can't really comment on necessarily having a bad grip on a wrist release, because I shot a wrist release for 1 year. But more so on a hand release with a button, I emphasize on getting it right in here every time so it fits up perfect on my cheek. I don't want it too close to the tip of my fingers, and I don't want to be gripping it all the way in like this, which will also create torque. So that is my first step that I'm saying to myself, that I'm thinking, that then turns into action. So there's, boom, step one. Once that gets through, it's like watching a system load. Green check mark. Now I can move to my second process. So my second process is going to seem very simple, but this one can linger with you if you don't pay attention to it throughout the course of your process. So the second one I want to discuss, and this is my process. I hope that you develop your own process. Mine's a 4-step process, and I hope that you can develop yours, whether it be a 3-step, a 5-step, whatever it may be. But my second step that I think about is bubble. Now we all know that on your sight there's a bubble in the leveler, okay? I think that we put that bubble, most people in general put that bubble in between those lines very quickly, and then they move on. I'll discuss why it's important to linger on that throughout your whole step here. So once you've got that bubble in between the lines, most people will want to move on directly to their next step. I mean, very quickly. But I think having the ability to consistently and consciously hold that bubble between those lines extremely steady before you move on to your next step is going to be a direct reflection of your ability to get a clean, accurate shot off. Not necessarily the release of the arrow, but where you want the arrow to go. Almost in a torque sense, like I said, going back on your grip. If you've got a bad grip, this will directly affect your bubble. So, I mean, all these things for me lead in and bleed into each other. So once I've got a good grip, to me, it's easier to hold that bubble. But being able to hold and maintain that bubble smoothly before you go on to your next step is vitally important. Again, I want to talk about the closed loop process. If for some reason you're drawn back, bam, your grip's good, check. And then you go on to your bubble and you're struggling to get that bubble in there in a manner, then let down. It's not a shot to your ego. It's actually, again, it's a direct reflection of your ability to be coherent throughout this. Again, we're blueprinting a controlled shot process, and why it's important, I want to always keep coming back to it, is when you're in front of a stud buck, a lot of this will go out the window unless you have quite literally ingrained it in your head. And so, and talking about ingraining that part in your head, another thing that made it click for me was treating it like a free throw in basketball. Doing the same thing every time, which that over the course of time will create a tempo in which you have your shot to go off. I now personally know if I can't get my bubble center in a certain amount of time, which has got to be milliseconds throughout the course of my shot, maybe 1 Mississippi or something like that, maybe a full second, maybe, then I'm letting down. Because I know I've done something wrong. I probably gripped my bow wrong. I probably gripped my release wrong, which is directly affecting the accuracy of my bubble. So you got to let down. You got to be within that closed loop process. Most people get, again, like I said, they get that bubble level and they just move on very quickly, very quickly. By the time I move on from my bubble ain't moving. My bubble is so steady. It is extremely steady, and that's how serious you need to take holding your bubble, because anything outside those black lines, your pin and that your arrow's not going to go where your pin says it's going to go, because that bubble's outside of your line. So being able to keep it in those lines like your life depended on it is extremely important. But again, like I said, most people just breeze past that, and this step will linger with you as you move on to your next 2 steps, because again, you'll find yourself always going back to making certain that bubble's in there, and it's not a conscious thing. You're kind of inherently doing it, which is good to be able to think like that. And then after I get my bubble extremely steady and level, I move on to my pin. Cheers, boys. Once I get my pin where it needs to go, I've got to be able to trust that the first 2 parts of my process have gotten me there. Okay? I know going back to shooting a free throw in basketball, a lot of people have trained themselves to look at the back of the rim or the front of the rim, whatever it may be. Whatever clicks for you is what clicks for you. But once you do that, you don't necessarily stare at that rim, the back of the rim, like it owed you money. But for some reason, when we're shooting in archery, we get a real heavy emphasis on placing that pin where it needs to go. Placing that pin where it needs to go. And if you talk to a lot of people who shoot guns, and I'm not necessarily a big gun guy, but there is what they call a figure 8. Nobody is humanly possible can hold anything steady while letting a shot off. Doesn't matter if it's a gun, if it's a bow, crossbow. Unless you've got it stable on an environment where there's no other external factors, you're going to have a loop, a figure 8. You're going to have some sort of movement. And that's where you've got to trust your pin is going, and your focus needs to be on what you're looking at, not your pin. So once my pin needs to go where it needs to be, I'm looking at what I need to be looking. So I need to trust my pin's going to go what I'm looking at. Stop looking at your pin and bringing it there. This is going to be the oddest advice I'm ever going to give you, but I've heard it from a guy named MFJJ from Elk Shape, which was some of the best advice I've ever heard from Elk Shape Archery channel, by the way. If you guys ever get a chance, go watch them. They're great. I stopped aiming. I stopped aiming a long time ago. It's not that I stopped aiming at what I'm looking at. It's just that I stopped considering where my pin's going to go every time. I trust that when my pin's where it needs to be, I trust my bow's in line. I trust my shot process. So spending any time longer on placing the pin where it needs to be, once it gets there, is a waste of time. And the reality of it is too, once you're doing that, and you're placing any longer time on placing your pin where it needs to be, this is something that made it click for me. It's kind of like riding a skateboard. When you ride a skateboard, where's your weight? Your weight's in the back. So the second you start aiming your bow and focusing on your pin more than you need to, your weight's now in front of you. Your weight is now steering with your front arm. And I see that a lot, man. I see that with some buddies I shoot with. I've seen that with a couple previous people I've hunted with. You want to have that weight back so that pin even holds steadier. Because I know it sounds odd, but your weight as you're pulled back needs to be on your pulled back arm, not up here. And a lot of people steer it, and there's no reason to steer. Your pin, if it's tuned, if your bow, if it's tuned, is going to go where your pin is. So stop trying to steer it and move on in your process. Trust once your pin's there, it's there. Like how many times you need to steer it. And I myself become extremely guilty of all these things, and which is why I've developed my own process, especially after hearing a lot of great advice from a lot of people on the internet, and having a lot of bad personal experience being in the stand and wishing I had a couple more bucks on the wall that I feel like I should have had I had a controlled shot process. You know, and everybody's talked to those people, you know, man, it just went so quick. Man, here, it just did this, it just did that. And the only way to control that, guys, is to have your own protocol and slow it down. And the last step, guys, which is the most important, I'm going to have a cheers for you, cold beers on this one, because this is an extremely important one. I think it gets overlooked all the time. Is here we go. And that's something I say to myself at the end of putting that pin on where it needs to be. Here we go. Here we go. Now I'm working myself through my shot process. I'm pulling until it goes off. You know, the reason why here we go is so important is that it solidifies that you've done everything in your process up to that point. You've focused on your grip. You've maintained your bubble. And now you've got your pin where it needs to be. So here we go. Here we go is the last thing you need to hear before you shoot, because it ensures that you've done all the proper steps. And a lot of people, like I said, will get hung up on that pin and hung up on that pin. And once that pin gets there, it's here we go. It doesn't need to be continuing to try and get that pin to where you want to be. It's putting the pin there, and here we go. Trust that you've gripped right. Your bubble's in the right place. Your pin's where it needs to be. So once you get to that final step, it's a solidification of knowing that you've arrived at each step in the sequence properly in a fashion that's going to allow you to have a controlled shot. Guys, this is stuff that I don't care who you are. You will, if you don't maintain this mindset, it will creep back up on you. There's days I punch that trigger like it owed me money, or like I was freaking Daniel's son in Karate Kid. I don't care who you are. If you don't pay attention or are extremely conscious towards this, you're going to be slipping back into bad patterns that are inevitably creeping up on the best of people. Cameron Haynes, a Levi Morgan, people like that. Levi Morgan always talks about, and he's a target bow shooter, an excellent hunter, and a big sponsor of Matthews. But Levi Morgan, if you get a chance, go take a look him up. He's great. He always talks about fighting off the demons. He himself, being an 11-time national champion archer, has to constantly fight off the demons of being able to rush through your shot, punching the trigger, feeling anxious at the very end and just hurried up and wanting to let it go. And if you think that anybody out there doesn't struggle with this, they're lying to you. And if they truly aren't struggling with it at that particular moment, then they're consciously making an effort to fight that off. You know, one thing that helped me, and I'll get into this next episode, I was debating whether to do it this one or not, but I really wanted to talk about my shot process because I feel like that's what changed my hunting career. I killed this buck going through the entire shot process, this buck going through the entire shot process, and when that arrow let go, I never had more confidence than ever that was a dead deer. I mean, and that feeling was so ensuring that I was like, I'm never not working on that shot protocol. You know, so being able to focus on those things and being conscious of that and seeing the results in high stakes moments where adrenaline's going will allow you to really pursue it even further, you know. But until you're in those moments and suffer enough from having bad shot protocol, or not even thinking, if you will, you're not going to understand the value in it. In the next episode, I'm going to talk about what got me to this point. I mean, obviously, I just explained it, a couple bad deer experiences, but not making the shot I wanted to. But a couple things that really helped get me to this point are being able to buy a couple releases that made me be honest to my shot process. One was a back tension release through knock-on called the Silverback. And then the second one is the exact same hand release design, but with a thumb button. And again, it's a back tension release. The first one is, and the second one is a thumb button called Knock to It. And so when you pick up the thumb button, it's just seamlessly transitioning from a back tension release to a thumb button. So the thought process and your shot protocol should be seamlessly transitionable. And those are the things that help me. I'm going to dive into probably releases my next video and talking about some of the gear that helped me kind of up my game, whether it be, whether it be how I've hunted out of stands, moving to saddles, or releases. I'll talk more about that, but those allowed me to get into a right frame of mind to be extremely productive. Again, like I said, at high stakes situations, because that's what we all live for in the fall, is working hard to get in front of a massive whitetail. And it's almost like, what are you going to do when you get in front of it? A lot of us, and I didn't realize this for myself, I've gotten in front of a couple deer, and the answer to my question that I just facetiously asked is, I'd shit the bed. And if you're not ready for that moment will gobble you up quicker than you can even have wished you got in that moment. So being conscious toward that is going to allow you to get the deer you want, fellas. I mean, I hope I've helped you guys through explaining my shot process. Guys, I don't know if I'd go any further past the 5-step. 4-step was perfect for me. Some people shorten it down to a 3-step. It's about what fits you, man. Like I said, I wouldn't go past the 5-step just because you got a lot of thoughts that turn into actions. But I mean, if you have a 6-step shot process, then you do. I mean, if that's what works for you, I know a lot of, again, I got a lot of buddies that I shoot arrows with and who make good shots all the time. And I'm not even certain that they know why they made that good shot. That's what the basis of this whole conversation is, knowing how you made that good shot, And hey guys, I appreciate you fellas tuning in. Thank you for subscribing, man, and watching, fellas. I mean, we're growing at a pretty good rate. Bear with me, man. This is probably going to be the last time you see me in this setup right here. I'm getting ready to make the move here in the next couple days, so the next time you see me on camera, things will look different, man. I'll be in Tulsa, Oklahoma, not Southern Illinois, guys. So I appreciate you fellas tuning in, and cheers. Till next time, boys.